Our special guest today is Danielle Cobo. Danielle is a former Fortune 500 senior sales manager, and she's renowned for empowering individuals with the grit, resilience, and courage to thrive professionally and personally. With more than 15 years of corporate experience, she knows how to build high-performing teams that increase sales, productivity, and employee retention. Even amid the upheaval of downsizing, restructuring, and acquisitions, she propelled her team to a #1 national ranking. Her resiliency motivated her to earn 4 consecutive National Sales Excellence Awards. Danielle is also the best-selling author of Unstoppable Grit and hosts the globally top-rated podcast, Unstoppable Grit Podcast. Danielle Cobo, welcome to Next Steps Forward.
Thanks for having me, Chris. I'm excited to be on the podcast.
No, thanks for your time. We know how busy you are, so I really appreciate it. Danielle, you're a former Fortune 500 senior sales manager and a 4-time National Sales Excellence Award winner. Successful salespeople are made and not born. How were you made into one, and then how did you make others into successful salespeople?
Ooh, great question. You're right. I believe that there's innate characteristics that are within us, and then there's a lot of characteristics that are nurtured over time. And for me, I was very blessed to have a mother who role modeled grit and perseverance and determination for me. So I believe a lot of my upbringing played a critical role in what developed the grit and helped me succeed long-term in my career. My mom was a single mom when I was 5 years old. She was going to school to get her bachelor's degree while working. And I saw her tenacity and I saw her perseverance, and seeing that if you really have a goal and you take the steps and work the goal and persevere through even some of the challenges and look at what are the areas you can control and maybe focus on those areas versus the areas that you can't control, how can you learn and grow and be a better person for tomorrow? And so I believe that a lot of my grit came directly from my mom. And when it comes to helping other individuals achieve their goals, it's first tapping into understanding what their motivators are. And a lot of times, we talk about, well, what motivates me is, providing for my family. But what is it about providing for your family that motivates you? And how does that play a critical role in helping you thrive professionally and personally?
I think we were meant to be in the podcast together today. I'm also an only child from a single mom, single at age 2. She went back to school after divorce and got her bachelor's, her master's, and was working on her doctorate until she passed away. And my listeners have heard the phrase that she basically instilled in me is, we might not be able to change the world today, but we can change the world around us. So I love the unstoppable grit. We're going to get into that a little bit later in the show, but I'm glad you're here today, so we got a lot to talk about. So many people look down their noses at salespeople and they insist they'd never get into sales, yet we all sell every day. We have to sell. Kids sell to parents and letting them go out, stay up late, or borrow the car. We have to sell the kids and getting out of bed and going to school the next morning after they stay up late. I have to sell my wife and trying a new restaurant. We definitely have to sell the boss on our ideas. Why do people have such a negative attitude about salespeople, and how can the profession do a better job of selling itself?
You're right. There's so many misconceptions, I believe, or assumptions, or this idea of what we believe salespeople are. And a lot of that comes from, movies like Wolf of Wall Street, or that, the slime car salesperson that's trying to get one over you. But I believe, just like you, that we're all in sales. You work for a customer, you're in customer service, and your goal is to earn the trust of the customer to either have them, not go to a competitor and continue to do business with you. If you're in a leadership role, you're selling yourself on why you're going to be taking, you're going to be sharing the vision of the future of the organization and how does that align with the team's goals. And you're kind of selling that to the team. But to me, I don't look at sales as I'm selling a widget. Sales and a lot of the sales trainings that I teach is about understanding the individual customer. What are their challenges, and what are some different ways that whatever your product offers is providing value to that customer. So I almost don't even call my sales. When I was a sales leader, I didn't call them sales reps. I called them consultants. Because ultimately, if you're taking the approach of understanding, here's the challenges and the pain points of that particular customer, and you're asking, thought-provoking questions to uncover what those pain points are, then you're really putting your consultant hat on and helping that customer understand different processes or products that they can implement into their business that are going to help the business overall improve. And that's more of a consultative approach than it is just selling a product. But yeah, it's interesting. All of us are in sales. We're all negotiators. My kids, I believe my kids are pretty good negotiators, but they're also trying to sell me, and I'm a little better than them. So, but they still win me over sometimes. They stay up late or do things like that.
I love the word consulting, because I was going to mention the consultative sales process, and that's what we're getting more and more into. And I've also said in the show many times that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and close your mouth and listen with your ears. And so that just helps that whole sales process there. What advice do you have for someone considering a job or a career in sales?
I would first look at, so one of the exercises that I talk about in my book, Unstoppable Grit, is getting clarity on what you enjoy doing. And one of those exercises is take a piece of paper, a white piece of paper, and on one side of the piece of paper, like you have your white piece of paper and then you have your resume, and look at every single role that you've had throughout your career, and look at on the left side of that white piece of paper, what did you love about each of those roles? What were the roles and responsibilities that you loved in each of the roles that you've had throughout your career? What is it that you enjoyed about the leadership team? The people that you enjoyed working with, the colleagues that you enjoyed working with. And then on the right-hand side, what did you not like about that particular job and the people that you worked with? And I believe that will help you gain clarity on what roles and responsibilities that you like, you don't like, and that's going to help determine if you're going to be going into sales or not. Sales, the type of characteristics that I look for in a sales professional and what leads to success is, do they have grit? Do they have the passion and perseverance towards long-term goals? Because the reality is you're going to get more no's than you are yeses. Are you adaptable? And understanding that a lot of times you may go into your week with a plan, but then you've got fires that pop up out of nowhere, and you're trying to navigate through which direction to go. And then the other is do you like spending time asking questions and listening and being a problem solver and solution oriented? And are you more of that extrovert type personality as well? So, when I'm working with individuals, we'll do DISC personality assessments. We'll go through their current job. I'll give one example. My husband was in sales for a long time. We grew up in a pretty affluent area. I did not grow up in an affluent home, but I happened to be raised in an affluent area. And he was constantly getting into sales because he was chasing the dollar. Because yes, sales can be a very lucrative career, and it can provide a lot of resources for you. However, he wasn't really fulfilled. He realized that was not a fulfilling career for him. And so after us having some very candid and deep conversations at the age of 32 years old, he quit his job in sales and joined the military at 32 years old, which is complete opposite of sales. I wouldn't say opposite of sales, because we all do sales, but not your traditional, I guess, sales approach. So the best advice that I would give is really gain some clarity on what you enjoy doing. Don't so much chase the title, but look at the roles and responsibilities and job description. Is that something that you enjoy doing?
We're going to get into your husband's transition a little bit later in the show, but I love what you just mentioned about how you're going to get more no's than yeses. My listeners, I'm a huge sports fan, and if you're a Major League Baseball player, you're in the Hall of Fame if you're successful 30% of the time. And, as a salesperson, you just have to remember, don't take it personally. It's not you, it's the product, or they have another alternative mousetrap or something like that. So just keep that in the back of your mind that, it's not you, don't take it personally. It's just part of the job. And so I'm glad you raised that. You decided to go out on your own when a series of events came at you in rapid succession in a 6-month period. And that's when you decided, in your own words, that, quote, life has a way of pushing us to our limit, and sometimes in those moments and trials, growth and transformation occur. What pushed you to your limits, and how did you grow and transform?
Oh, yeah. So it was 2020 was the year for many of us, the year of change, the year of trials and tribulations and change, and really pushing us to the limit and figuring and kind of figuring out what this next phase of our life is going to look like. For me, 2020 started with my husband returning home from a deployment. In 2019, he was deployed for a year. Our twins at the time, our twin boys, were between the ages of 1.5 and 2.5. So when he left, they were learning to walk, they were saying their first words, they were in a crib, and all of a sudden he comes home from serving a year deployment in Iraq, where he's being a directive soldier officer and telling people where to go in high stakes situations. And he comes home to these 2.5-year-old twin boys who are formulating complete sentences, who have opinions, who are throwing temper tantrums, who are sleeping in toddler beds. And as difficult as it was for him while he was away, because it was very demanding on me in the sense of, the worry is if he's going to be okay? Is he going to come home safe? And, leading a team across 5 states while being the primary caregiver of our kids. The transition of him coming home was very difficult. I was used to parenting one way. He had a different style. He was trying to get to know our kids since he'd been gone for half their life. And that took some time. So that was a big change for us. And then as we started to find our rhythm, March 8th, my mom had passed away unexpectedly, and she had passed away from suicide. And so it was there had been some incidents in the past where I had known that this could have been a possibility, that it was going to happen. But of course, any time that somebody's life is taken by suicide, it's hard to really comprehend the pain that goes into that. And so as I was finding a way to cope with the passing of my mom, a week later, the pandemic hit. And so I wasn't able to fly back to California and go take care of my mom's things. I had to do everything remotely. And there was a lot of uncertainty around the pandemic too. Everything had shut down. We didn't know, are we going to have a job? Or are we not going to have a job? Are we going to furlough? So the stress of that. But it ended up happening that the company that I was with had been acquired by a larger organization, like a top 10 pharmaceutical company. And the culture shifted a lot, and it became a very toxic work environment. In fact, many people from the organization have since left. And so all of these things happened in then a 6-month period. And it really was that time in my life where I looked at the mirror and looked at myself and said, first off, I had left the company I'd been with for 7 years, and I felt lost and confused. I had tied my identity to my career. And I'm like, who am I? And what do I want to do next? And that was a point where I believe, after that, I look back at that experience, and as much as it was difficult at the time, I was suffering from panic attacks and uncertainty. It was probably the best blessing that I could have ever had, because I wouldn't have known what was possible for my life if I wasn't if God hadn't shut that door and redirect me to something greater.
Way off topic here, but you're the poster child of an unstoppable grit. As you went through that March 8th, 2020 situation, obviously the terrible event with your mother, with the change in the job, how was your personal well-being and mental health?
Great question, because I to be very transparent, because I believe that there's value in really peeling back the onion and letting people see who you really are. What you see on social media isn't always what happens behind the scenes. And in that moment, I was depressed. I was having panic attacks, which were so debilitating. I felt like I couldn't get out of bed. Because of my upbringing, and my mom and I had a beautiful and a very broken relationship. There was a lot of turmoil in our relationship throughout my upbringing because of mental health that was in our family. And so I put a lot of emphasis on my income, because to me, income is security, income is safety, income is like my independence. And so when that was stripped away and I'd left the company, it really just it shocked my world. So I would say it was a good 6 months of anxiety and panic and trying everything that I could to kind of pull myself together and figure out what I wanted to do.
And what happened to pull you through the other side there to get you past that 6 months of the panic attack and not getting out of bed?
Yeah. So, one of the, and I talk about this in the book, but when my mom had passed away, I was tasked with writing her obituary. And that was a really interesting and reflective experience for me, because on one hand, I really wanted to do my mom like justice in providing something that captured the beauty of her life. And then it started for me to really think about, well, when it comes time for me to pass, what do I want people to say about me? And the reality is I don't want people to say she was a hard worker and she stayed late hours and I can always count on her to get the job done. Like, that's not what I want to be known for. And so what I did is I at that time I had my self-confidence had been affected a lot and I didn't really know who I was. So I went on Facebook and I said, if there was 2 words that you can use to describe me, what would it be? And my comments got flooded in, and it was like gritty, perseverance, like determined, inspiring, impactful, empowering. And so I took those words and I wrote my own obituary from the perspective of my family members and a perspective of my colleagues. And what that did is it provided me a guiding light as to whatever decision I made from then forward, whatever company I work with or a business that I start or decision that I make, how does that align with the person that I want to be known for, the impact that I want to make? And that became the guiding light, because impact was one of those words that came out of it. And to me, that's kind of what started this journey of like, how can I make a greater impact in the world? And that's what started this. I started to do career coaching. I started to get more involved in my church. I started to do more volunteer work. I signed up to be homeroom parent at my kid's school. And and what I found is that has been so much more fulfilling than the late hours that I spent at work, because everything that I do is more about impact. And it's been an amazing experience. But I would encourage anybody, I know it's kind of an odd exercise to do, and but I would encourage everybody to do that exercise of write your own obituary and have that be an opportunity to understand, like, what are your core values? What do you want to be known for? And let that be the guiding light for yourself.
That's a pretty gutsy thing to do, to put on social media, give 2 words to describe what you think of me. I'd be afraid to see what my responses would be. So I give you a lot of credit for doing that. And I love how you're talking about it. It's, what's it going to be when my journey here is done? How are people going to look back at me? And I'm a huge country music fan. And Tim McGraw has this song that talks about, are they going to judge you by your possessions or how many lights are in your procession? And that, I think, sums it all up. And maybe as a follow-up to that, how much of your exhaustion and feelings of being overwhelmed were due to your husband's deployment and mom's passing? And how much did job burnout contribute to those feelings?
So burnout is one of those, I would say I have experienced burnout on multiple occasions through my life. But I am a firm believer that there's a lot of people in this world that choose to live in chaos. There's a lot of people in this world that just choose to live in this, I'm busy. And it's not a comparison of like who's busier than the other, but ultimately I believe it's a mindset. I know some people that they're constantly, I'm so busy. And I'm like, wait a minute, you're retired and you're volunteering and I'm running a business, have 7-year-old twins, volunteer at my church. My kids play baseball. I'm homeroom parent, but I don't feel busy. I say my schedule is full. I say this is, I'm in control of my own schedule. I'm in control of what goes on it. And so I can choose what goes on it and what doesn't go on it. And if it gets to the point where I'm feeling overwhelmed, then it's an opportunity to relook at my schedule and be like, really, where do my priorities lie and where can I set some better boundaries? So there have been many times where I have experienced burnout. There have been many times where I have gone through depression, but I'm able to recognize in those moments, okay, wow, I am burnt out, or I'm going through depression. Now I'm going to sit down in a quiet room. I'm going to get clarity as to what's contributing to it. And then specifically, what steps can I take to change the outcome? Because I don't want to perpetually be in that situation. And we are all have the ability to take control and make changes. It's just a matter of, are you willing to do it? And are you willing to look at and also view your life in a different mindset?
How do you help clients recognize when they're experiencing burnout instead of just dealing with normal stress?
So stress is kind of one of those things. It could be temporary, maybe. Like there's never this, people will say work-life balance. I don't believe that work-life balance is I have personal life 50% of the time and I have work 50% of the time. No, there's some days that I spend more time at work and there's some days I spend more time with my kids. To me, work-life balance is do you feel balanced in your life? It's more of a feeling. Do you feel balanced? There are going to be times where you've got peaks and valleys throughout your life that are more stressful than others, given different circumstances. But if you're finding yourself in a perpetual stress, overwhelm, that can lead to burnout. And the burnout is, it gets to a point where there's like anxiety attacks. It gets to the point where you don't have you don't have motivation to go to work or do fun things. That's when it really gets to the burnout state.
And are there some key strategies to recover from burnout?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a typical recovery time? Any suggestions on that?
Say that question again.
Are there some key strategies to recover from burnout?
Yeah. So the first time when you're experiencing burnout, first you want to recognize the signs. So there's the physical signs and there's the emotional signs of burnout. One of the things that I do is ways that we can increase our self-awareness on burnout are looking at the physical signs. So in the book, I talk about the body check. And that is stand in front of a mirror and your body communicates to you when you are burnt out. It's just a matter of, are we paying attention to it? And so some of the physical signs are, is your hair thinning? Is it falling out? Is it dull? Is it lifeless? Those could be signs of burnout. Is your face, are you having acne? Are you having breakouts? For me, every third quarter when I was in sales, capital equipment sales, I would break out in hives because that was always our slowest quarter and still had a high quota. That is definitely a sign of burnout and stress that I should have recognized early on, but I was just young and naive and just wanted to power through. Are you tense in your shoulders and your neck that are causing an increase in migraines? Are you having a hard time digesting your food? So those are all the physical signs of burnout. And then the emotional signs of burnout could be irritability, could be mood swings, could be lack of motivation, could be sadness, depression. So there's definitely the physical and the emotional signs. And it's just a matter of like, are you taking time throughout your day to pause and check in with yourself? And when you check in with yourself and you have the self-awareness to know what those signs are, that's when you can then take action to make the changes to improve your life.
So say someone's burned out, they come to you. How do you help reignite someone's passion and purpose in their work?
Well, first, I would want to find out the source of their burnout. So a lot of times it's kind of like, walk me through your typical day, walk me through what are the tasks or events that you have that are draining to you, or, when you find yourself irritated, like what causes that irritation. I first want to know what the source of the burnout is so that we can make some tweaks to get some better balance. I definitely, in the book, and then also in a lot of my workshops, I talk about time management. I'm a big believer, and there's different tweaks that we can do within our lives to create better time management and streamline processes for ourselves. And then to uncover somebody's like motivation, it's a lot of just getting to know the person. And I say, you know, whether it's a friend, as a leader, as leaders, we can also be our colleagues' friends and put your curiosity hat on and ask some questions. You know, tell me a little bit about your upbringing. Tell me a little bit about how you spend your weekends. You know, if I know, for example, that when a member on my team, they are spending their weekends at the baseball field with their kids, that's a good indicator that one of the things that motivates them as to why they work is because they want to be able to pay for their kids' batting cage practices and to pay for their sports. So I'd say that is just be curious, ask thought-provoking questions, get to know the person, who they are, not what they do.
I'm laughing. You're talking about batting cages. My wife and I have a 12-year-old son, and so that's exactly what my bank statement looks like right now is the travel baseball team and the batting and pitching, and so I can absolutely relate to that. Your best-selling book and your podcast are both titled Unstoppable Grit. How do you personally define grit, and when did you decide that grit, unstoppable grit, is a critical trait for achieving long-term success?
So there was a TED Talk that I watched, and it was by Angela Duckworth, and I felt like she really captured how I was feeling most of my life. And that was, she did research and she found that IQ was not necessarily the indicator of success. It was passion and perseverance towards long-term goals. It's a world-renowned TED Talk. She wrote a book. I read the book. Actually, after I wrote my book, I read her book. But I do believe that, you know, I never felt like I was the smartest person in the room, but I always knew I would be successful because I knew that I would figure out what it took to get and achieve what I wanted. So it's having a growth mindset. It's being adaptable. It's being super clear on what your goals are and putting a plan together, implementing your plan and executing your plan. And so that's why I believe that grit is really kind of one of those key indicators of what success looks like. And you take examples like Oprah Winfrey. She did not grow up in an affluent area. She had trials and tribulations through all of her upbringing. And she is one of the most influential people out there and very successful. I believe it's because of her grit, along with, you know, some of the other people out there. You've got like Sarah Blakely, Denzel Washington. There's definitely a lot of people out there that weren't provided all the resources, may not be the smartest person in the room, but they know who to lean on. They know how to ask for help. They're willing to learn and they're willing to adapt and they're willing to stay focused on what they want.
To learn and to adapt. You're never too old to learn something new and to adapt and change. And that's something I think people don't realize or think about, especially high-performing salespeople. They just think, I've got it. It's worked for 20 years. I can keep doing it. And they forget that things change, people change, the process changes. And so I guess your point is, you know, don't be stuck in your ways. You know, listen and see what the end client or customer is looking for. Danielle, in your experience, how does grit compare to talent when it comes to achieving success? And can grit compensate for a lack of natural ability?
Ooh, good question. So I think best to give this analogy or comparison is sports. There are some, you know, I have 7-year-old twins and they're raised in the same household, but they are two totally different kids. I mean, one sleeps hot, one sleeps cold. One loves to sit there and will play with Legos and build an extravagant Lego set, and the other one tells his brother to build it for him so he can play with it. So one of them's got a natural ability to excel in baseball, and the other one is good, but you know, not as natural. So there is some of us are born with like a natural talent towards something, just way that like our brain processes things, or our physical bodies and how they're built may have us lead towards a better talent. However, you can have an amazing talent, but if you don't have the grit to support it, you can almost be capped on what you can achieve. And so I truly believe that, you look at Tom Brady, for example, he was among one of the last picks at the draft, but he had grit. So he had talent, but not the same talent as what everybody, some of the first draft picks had. But he had grit and became one of the most recognized football quarterbacks of all time. He's the GOAT because, whether y'all like him or not, I still am going to praise him for what he's been able to accomplish. And I think grit was really the key differentiator.
As someone who's a New York fan, not a Boston fan, I don't like using the Tom Brady references, but I can't disagree with you, unfortunately. So we'll move on. How important are social connections or our professional network to our ability to be resilient during tough times?
Oh, if there's anything that we learned through the pandemic is community is everything. It is absolutely everything. I think about the times when I was going through trials and tribulations in my life, the moments that I reached out and asked for help and got involved in my community, I was able to get through some of those a lot faster than just trying to do it on my own. I believe that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's one of the most courageous, brave things that you can do. And you think about research out there. Research shows that people that volunteer live happier, more fulfilling lives. So when you think about, instead of asking for help as being a burden onto somebody, think about it as asking for help is giving the opportunity for somebody to experience joy and fulfillment. Think about somebody who out there, maybe if you ever read The 5 Love Languages by Dr. Gary Chapman, one of the love languages is acts of service. And so you reach out to somebody for help and maybe their primary love language, like mine is acts of service. And you just gave me an immediate boost in oxytocin and serotonin because I feel fulfilled. I feel needed and I want to help and I want to go in and make an impact in somebody's life. And if as little as it is, it could be watching your kids for a day when you got to go to the doctor's office, whatever it is. But yeah, I believe that community is everything. We were not put on this earth by God to do it alone. We are put on this earth to be in community.
Is there a difference between grit and resilience, or are they two sides of the same coin?
I believe resilience is your ability to bounce back when you face challenges, and your grit is kind of your key motivation to keep moving forward.
And I guess the big question here now is, how do we develop grit? Can we just flip a switch and have unstoppable grit in one day? Or is it something that requires a lot of hard work over months or years?
There are some people that are a little bit more grittier than others, just an innate characteristic, but it's absolutely something that can be developed. It's just, there is. If you are willing to learn and grow and adopt a growth mindset, you can learn to be gritty. It's just being open and vulnerable to learning something new.
So I mentioned this before, you are the personification of unstoppable grit, but is there a limit to grit and resilience? And when is it time for someone to pivot or change their approach rather than continue to persevere?
Oh, good question. I just experienced this. I had particular goals in mind of how I wanted my, I say I'm an accidental entrepreneur because I wasn't intending on starting a business when I left the company that I was with, but ended up starting a business. It's just the way that that's where the doors had opened up. And, there were certain goals that I had in my business where I wanted to be, I was working on being a keynote speaker, and I was really focused on how can I make, my whole thing is impact. So I was like, how can I make a positive impact as many people's lives as I possibly can? And a lot of times that meant if I want to be doing keynote speakings, I want to be out on stages all the time. Well, as I was growing my speaking business and I started to travel more, I recognized that I had almost gone back into the pattern of where I was working in corporate, where I was gone all the time. And that doesn't necessarily best for that. I'm going to emphasize this point for the phase of life that I'm in right now. So I'm not saying never will that happen. I'm saying right now it's not necessarily a priority to be on as many stages as I can and to be traveling as much as I can, because my priority right now is to be there for my kids, to do their homework with them, to be at every single baseball game that I possibly can. So I took some time. I actually paused my business for a month and a half when I had kind of reached this burnout period, reevaluated what I wanted in my life. And I started to work my business around my life. And I started to put some parameters like, okay, I'll do one speaking engagement a month or 2 speaking engagements a month. And then everything else I do virtually. And that's what's going to work for my life right now. So I really pivoted. But again, it goes back into, it's so important to take time to pause, reflect, reevaluate, reassess, and then create a plan, implement it, and execute it.
You've noted that our worst critic is often living rent-free in our own head. How much influence do our own negative words have on shaping our actions and outcomes? And how do we avoid that dialogue with ourselves?
A big. I would say that it's like that pesky mosquito that like is constantly buzzing in your ear, telling you all the things that you can't do. You're not smart enough. You're not successful enough. So you've got that internal dialogue, and then you've got social media who influences it even more because you're seeing what other people are doing and you start to get in the comparison mode. And then some people, they're just wired that way. Like one of my boys, he's just the way that he is wired. He is so hard on himself. And it's really hard for me, especially when you're like a motivational speaker and transformational speaker. And I'm like, but this is what I do for a living. How do you not, why are you like this? But it's just the way that he is, just the way that he's wired. And so it's really taking the time, like when I'm working with job seekers, for example, and a lot of job seekers are feeling deflated and they're feeling discouraged and they're frustrated through the process because it's really hard to find a job, especially, you know, at the level of the level that I work with. And when the job seekers, I'll say, okay, 2 things. One is write down all of your accomplishments throughout your career. Like a lot of times we forget everything that we have accomplished. And so it's important to take time to recognize it, to celebrate it, and to look back. I had one person I was working with, client I was working with, and she's like, I did that exercise. And she goes, man, I'm a badass. I'm like really cool. And the other one, and this is from somebody, Dr. Brian Davidson, who was on my podcast, Unstoppable Grit. And he had said, take a piece of paper and on one side of the piece of paper, write down everything that you've experienced in your life. And on the other side of the piece of paper, write down everything that you've overcome. So what's happened to you, and then transition that into what's have you overcome. And when you start to focus on what you've overcome, you start to focus on your accomplishments throughout your career, you start to focus on the good, and then you start to rewire that negative thinking in your brain.
Big question for the day.
Mm-hmm.
What's your cat's name?
Yeah, they just came in here. So I just got 2 kittens last week. They were rescued. I think they're about like 8 weeks old. I've got Maverick and Harley.
Awesome.
So Harley's a girl and Maverick's a boy, and they are mischievous to say the least. They're climbing all over my house.
So I have to ask, because I've got 2 Shih Tzus here, also both rescues. One's more cat-like, but my listeners know my other Shih Tzu, Zeke, very well, because he lets everybody know when the UPS or Amazon delivery comes. And so luckily, he's literally asleep on my feet on the desk right now. So I just wanted to bring the pets into that. So back to what we were just talking about, on the other side of the coin, how can the right self-talk instill confidence and optimal performance? And how can we train ourselves to use more empowering language?
Ooh, okay, yeah. So neurolinguistics is a way that if someone just Googles neurolinguistics and how you reframe the words that we use. So 1, my life is not busy. My life is full. Another one could be I get to versus I have to. You think about, oh, I have to cook dinner. Instead, I get to cook dinner, because quite honestly, I'm blessed that I get to cook dinner. I am blessed that I have food in my refrigerator. I am blessed that I have a house to cook food in. It's not something I have to do. It is something that I am blessed that I get to do. Instead of I have to pick up my kids, I get to pick up my kids. I have to exercise, or I get to exercise. I get to fuel my body. And for the salespeople out there, instead of I have to role play, because let's face it, none of us like to role play, even though it's extremely beneficial. I've done it. I get to role play. I get to master my I get to master my sales techniques. I get to master objection handling. I get to master my negotiation skills. I get to role play so that I can be more confident going into the appointments with my clients than I did if I didn't role play. And so using different words from have to get to, from busy to full, are just some of the ways that we can use neurolinguistics to reframe our mind in the way that we approach our life.
And your cat just knocked over a plant.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. See, yeah, there.
And maybe, I guess, as a follow-up to that, in terms of the words that you choose, how can we become more aware of the language we use? Are there any tools or habits or practices you recommend?
Oh, it's hard. I would say if you're a podcaster, it's easy to pick up on them. And the reason being is because when I had my podcast, I listened to every single episode. So I was able to pick them up. But it is a little bit more difficult because it's so ingrained within us and so part of our everyday language that it's really beneficial when you invest in a coach and you have something that can kind of pick up on those words for you. So a lot of times when I'm working with clients, I'll be like, okay, wait, pause. We just said something that we can just change just a little bit to get a different outcome on how we view things. And like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize I said that. You're able to pick up on it so quickly. And it's just because I'm more in tune to it. And so having somebody else kind of help you say, hey, I'm share with somebody. Maybe you've got a friend, a family member, or a colleague, and let them know maybe some things that you're currently saying or feeling. And can you help me pick out some different ways when I get into that mindset?
You mentioned earlier how important it is to ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you believe asking for help is an essential skill for personal and professional success?
Okay, so you had mentioned like there are some people out there who've been doing sales for 15 years. In fact, I just got off this call where I was talking with an organization like, oh, well, my team has been in sales for 15 years. They know what they're doing. And I'm just going, but does learning stop? Because the world is evolving. Like AI is coming into play. The way that we do business is different every single year. So if you don't evolve with the times, it doesn't matter how many years of sales you've been in, you're going to fall behind the curve. So I believe that asking for help, if you want to get promoted, ask for help, get a mentor, get a career coach. If you want to find a new job, ask for help. If you want to improve your sales, and reach out to the top performing sales reps in your company and ask them what they're doing well. Asking for help is probably one of the most powerful, courageous, brave things that you can do to help you achieve the goals that you want to achieve.
And what happens to us physically when we ask for help?
There are some people that like physically when we ask for help, it's there's a fear associated. And a lot of times that fear comes from, well, are they going to judge me? And when you start to release that, what are people going to think? Instead of like, what are people are going to think? How about, I wonder what type of friendship we can develop by me just asking for help? Because a lot of times that's where friendships form, is by asking for help.
And maybe as a pile on to that, is there an ideal time to ask for help? And how do you recommend approaching someone without feeling like a burden?
I believe in just being direct and honest. Like, I don't know if there's necessarily like a perfect time to ask for help. It really depends on the situation. But like, if you are wanting to promote into a new role, reach out to your manager and communicate what your goals are and ask, is there anybody that I'd really like to get set up with a mentor? Is there anybody that you would like, that you believe would be a good fit that I could reach out to that could mentor me? If you feel like you're not getting that support within the organization, then that's when like reaching out to career coach is really helpful, mainly because career coaches provide a safe, confidential area where you can be vulnerable and not have to worry about what your colleagues are going to think about you. It's a very safe environment. But there's no like secret sauce to ask for your help. It's just a matter of asking, like, hey, I need some help with this. Would you mind helping me? And what's the worst that thing happen? They can say no. Okay, then go ask somebody else.
So check your ego at the door.
Yeah. There's something very beautiful that my manager once said to me. And she said, as a woman in your 20s, you're just trying to figure out what you want to do. In your 30s, you're trying to figure out who you are. And when you hit your 40s, you really don't care what people think. You just are who you are. And I remember when I turned 40 and I'm going, wow, that is so true. I don't care what people think of me. Yeah, I want to be a good person and I want to be kind and known for being a positive influence in people's lives. But I don't care necessarily, like, if a person doesn't like me, then maybe our personalities are different. Maybe, we have different viewpoints, different values, different belief systems, and that's okay. There's a lot of people in this world. Now, if anything, I try to find every opportunity I can to embarrass my kids because I don't care what anyone thinks. So I told my son I was going to dress up in a chicken costume and run down his school saying I'm Jameson's mom, just because it'd be fun.
Did you?
No, not yet.
Halloween's coming.
Yeah.
So I reached out to you. I've asked for help. How important is it to follow up and express gratitude after receiving help? And then what impact does that have on future support?
So one of the things you can do at the end of a conversation when somebody's helped you is just ask the question, A, thank you so much for helping me. I really appreciate it. And what can I do to support you? And then be silent and listen. And it's just a simple question. And sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes it's like, somebody can ask me for help. I was watching I don't know. I was watching my friend's kid on this weekend. I was like, there's nothing that I needed in return. Actually, I just really enjoyed doing it. So that's also too, it's again, if someone's feeling like, oh, I have to do something back, then you're still seeing it. You're still viewing it as a burden on somebody. And so that's an opportunity to reframe, but just asking the question, like, what can I do to support you?
You mentioned earlier in the show about your husband making what I'll call a career change. He'd been interested in joining the Army for a long time and obviously wasn't happy doing what he was doing. It required join the Army, took a big pay cut, uproot your career and your family. When faced with such a dramatic decision, how can we be sure it's the right decision?
So for him, it was really a calling. And so for him, his father was an immigrant from Cuba. He was on one of the last Peter Pan flights from Cuba as he came here when he was 11 years old, lived in an orphanage until he was 13 years old, until his parents were able to come over to the U.S. from Cuba. And his dad ended up becoming a very prominent physician, a general surgeon in California. And so for my husband, it was really a calling for him. Like, he wanted to give back to the country that had provided a life for him and his family. It was really the American dream. And I think it's really important in the moments where don't look so much on, again, my husband was chasing the dollar. And I said, instead of looking at, like, in an ideal world, if money wasn't an object, like, really, what do you want to do? Because at the end of the day, you can continue to be in sales and you can make great money, but if you're not happy, what's the point? Like, our life is so short. What's the point of making all this money if you're going to be miserable every single day? Or maybe you don't make as much money, but you feel like every single time you go to work, you feel like there's a purpose and you feel fulfillment. I'd much rather choose that road. And so really, like, ask yourself, what is it that you want to do? What fulfills you? And really let that be the guiding light as to what direction you want your life to do. I mean, look at our teachers, for example. They don't get paid well. They are so underpaid. They do it because they love it, and they do it because they have a passion for teaching our kids. If there's one thing we can really learn from teachers, is that.
Well, it's the old adage, money can't buy happiness, right?
No, there's a lot of people that are really, really wealthy and miserable.
A lot. How does emotional resilience factor into adaptability, and what tools can we use to strengthen it?
I believe emotional resilience is really that it's going back to that growth mindset, and that's what leads into the adaptability. Dr. Carol Dweck, she did a lot of research on having a growth mindset. And a growth mindset is this understanding that we are born a certain way, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the way we always have to be. We can learn, we can grow, we can adapt, and we can shape ourselves into the person that we want to be tomorrow. And so that is really like where that emotional resilience comes from, and adaptability is understanding that growth mindset.
How can mindfulness or similar practices help our adaptability?
Well, I believe that when you believe in yourself, that you're capable of doing something, then that creates the mindset of the willingness to learn and the willingness to change and the willingness to grow. But if you are in this mindset that this is the way that I am and this is the way that I'm always going to be, then that's going to be a very limiting mindset for you on what you're on what you want to accomplish.
We have just a few minutes left. Please share with us again where we can find your podcast and your book, Unstoppable Grit. And then please take us into our conversation with advice or a story that helps our audience feel less stressed, more resilient, and become more empowered.
So my book is Unstoppable Grit, Break Through the 7 Roadblocks Standing Between You and Achieving Your Goals. You can get it at any major retailer, definitely on Amazon, which makes it so convenient. And then my podcast, Unstoppable Grit with Danielle Cobo podcast, is on Spotify and Apple. And then best way to follow me is on LinkedIn, because that's the platform that I tend to spend the most time on. And for those that are listening, if there's one piece of advice I'd really give, there's a lot of information that was shared in our conversation today. Pick one. Don't necessarily feel like I need to make all these changes in my life, but maybe pick 1 or 2 things that really resonated with you and start to implement that in your life. And then once you've got those that have become more innate and kind of natural in your flow, then you can pick another 2, but just pick 2.
Danielle Cobo, bestselling author of Unstoppable Grit, and host of the top-rated podcast, Unstoppable Grit Podcast with Danielle Cobo. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
And thank you to our audience, which now includes people in over 50 countries, for joining us for another episode of Next Steps Forward. I'm Chris Meek. For more details on upcoming shows and guests, please follow me on Facebook at facebook.com/Chris Meek Public Figure, and then X at @ChrisMeek_USA. We'll be back next Tuesday, same time, same place, with another leader from the world of business, politics, public policy, sports, or entertainment. Until then, stay safe and keep taking your next steps forward.